Hey Access Youth, you might wonder why we are sitting in front of my closet today. Welcome to like my real house. I didn't even stage it for you. This is what it really looks like. But I want to tell you a story. That's why we're sitting here. When I was a student at Northwest University in Kirkland in college, we used to play this dress-up scavenger hunt game, particularly with freshmen at freshman orientation. I played it as a freshman, and then as a student leader, as a junior and a senior, I also got to play it with the incoming freshmen. And what we would do is at the end of the week, orientation week, we as the upperclassmen leaders, we would dress up in disguise. We would put on scarves. We were pregnant women and homeless people and store clerks in full uniform, and we would go to a mall or a area in downtown Seattle, and we would let all the freshmen loose, and basically they had to identify who their leaders were, even though we were dressed in disguise. And it was just a really fun game. I mean, we had people seriously commit. When I was a freshman, I remember walking by this girl who I thought I knew pretty well. She was had a pretty alternative style. Her hair was always spiked up. She was always wearing really distinct jewelry, lots of piercings, combat boots, and we were in the Bellevue Mall, and I think I walked by her 6 times before I realized that she was dressed like she had just walked out of the Gap. I did not recognize her at all. She didn't even look the same because she was just hiding in plain sight. And I remember thinking, like, who are you? That's the question we're going to talk about today. Who are you? Who are you? This is the second question that Peter asks to the scattered Christians that he's writing to in his letter. And he asks the question, but he also gives them the answer. As a follow-up to the question we asked last week, he started with, where's your hope? And now he's reminding them of where their identity lies, who God says that they are. So here's what he says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. He says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who calls you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And it goes on to say some really good things. I recommend you read that section. But here's what I want to focus on. Peter reminds us of our identity in 3 ways. The first thing he says is that you are a work in progress. You're not finished yet. You were once not a people, now you are a people, so you belong. But that God is still working on us. He's forming and he's making us into the people that he wants us to be. The second thing he says is that you were chosen to be part of God's family. And you know what? God doesn't take that back. He doesn't just oust you when you screw up. He doesn't kick you out because of bad behavior. He doesn't forget about you and like, oh, you've been stuck in your house for a long time and haven't been able to go to church. Like, you're out. He doesn't say any of that. You were chosen to be part of God's family, and he paid a great price for you to be part of that family. He wants you. You're part of the family. Okay, so you're a work in progress. You're chosen to be part of God's family. And the third thing is that you were created to declare his praise. And that reminds me of a story in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 16, we read a story that's familiar to a lot of you about Paul and Silas. Paul and Silas get imprisoned for delivering a slave girl from a demon. Okay, her owners get really mad. They like drag them in front of this council. The council flogs them publicly, beats them publicly, and throws them into prison. And in this story, in Acts chapter 16, I think it's verses like 16 through 40, Paul and Silas are now isolated. They've been separated from all the other Christians. Now they're in prison. In fact, it says that their feet are in stocks and they're in the innermost part of the prison. And it says the story picks up and it says at midnight, while they're laying there, they start praying and singing hymns of praise to God. I don't know about you. I don't know if that would be my response in prison. It's not always my response when I'm initially isolated. Has it been your response? But the reminder is that they were called to declare the praises of him, created, not just called, created to declare the praises of him who called them out of darkness and into this wonderful light. And because they declare praises, it says that I think there's one particular verse 25 says that at midnight all the other prisoners are listening to them, and that suddenly there's an earthquake that not magically, shakes their jail cells open and rattles the chains off of their hands and feet, and that the jailer is so distraught that he says he's going to kill himself. And Paul and Silas say, wait, not a single prisoner has gone anywhere. We're all here. And they end up introducing him to the hope and forgiveness of Jesus. Right there, because they were willing to declare the praises of God in their isolation, in their darkness, in a moment when they were scattered and separated from all of their support. That's what they did. Paul and Silas remembered who they were, and they carried the hope of the gospel with them in darkness and pain and the isolation of prison. And Jesus met them there and transformed lives there too. Do you need to remember who you are today? Sometimes it's easy for us to separate our lives into different categories, I think, and be a little bit different with different groups. That's why I'm in front of a closet. Our clothing is one of the ways that we do that. We wear a little bit different things to represent ourselves in different ways. And that's really normal. But the challenge I want to give you today is to think about if you are declaring God's praises in every aspect of your social life. Are you declaring God's praises with your family? Are you declaring God's praises on your sports teams, in your music groups, with your friends, online, with your siblings? Does that aspect of who you are as a chosen person, as part of God's family, as forgiven and transformed, a declarer of God's goodness, is that represented in all the aspects where your life exists? It's a challenge. It's a challenge for adults, let alone teenagers. But I want you to think about this week how you can represent your faith, how you can declare God's goodness, maybe in just a very small way, in a new space, maybe where you haven't declared it before. Somehow that you can give God glory by remembering who you are. I love you guys. I hope you have a great week.